Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. I'm very pleased to have a guest on who has been on our show before, and boy, did he give us information that was interesting. His name happens to be Neville Johnson, and he's one of the most revered lawyers in Hollywood. As founding partner of the law firm of Johnson & Johnson's LLP, he's a man who fights tooth and nail for justice and for his clients. The Los Angeles Times has called him one of the most feared litigators in Hollywood. So, welcome again to the Susan Brender Show, Neville Johnson. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Now, Neville, let's get into some really important questions that I think that you'll find that pretty interesting, questions that you personally have really addressed. And so what we need to know about is what is dealing with an attorney like? Most people, when they think about an attorney, they think about suing, they think about divorce, they think about those things. But what about litigators and people like you? I mean, what is an attorney?
Well, people don't like attorneys until they need them. And there's there's lawyers that do transactional work. That means, contracts and advice on business. There are lawyers who specialize in wills and trusts, lawyers who specialize in education law, banking law, everything that you can think of from birth to death in society, lawyers are involved in because we have laws regulating them. When it comes to litigation, I would say that there's two main areas. One would be, or generally speaking, one would be business disputes, people busting up partnerships or claiming that a contract wasn't fulfilled, and then personal injury, which probably is much more than any other kind of litigation across America. That's everything from fender benders to wrongful deaths when somebody died in a bad accident or the bad medicine was given or medical malpractice, etc.
Neville, very often when you hear about these, you just called them people who deal with accidents and things of that sort, but, what about the word ambulance chasers? They're known, people say that these types of lawyers are ambulance chasers, and, they're looking for people who have accidents so that they can have more business. And they may give, and if I'm wrong, just tell me, but they may give people a bad impression.
There's a lot of, look, every profession has its bad eggs, medicine, banking, you name it, and same thing in law. And I think lawyers are held right at the bottom of terms of reputation and esteem, and I think journalists are down around there too. It is wrong to be an ambulance chaser means, as I understand it, more or less, that, well, the general term would be that they're somehow sleazy and et cetera. But there are laws in every state that prohibit the solicitation of clients, and those people that go out and do that rightfully are called ambulance chasers, and they can get disbarred or sanctioned by their local state bar for acting in such capacity. And of course it goes on. And you're not allowed, a lawyer cannot give a referral fee of any nature to somebody who refers him a client. You can, if you want to, gratuitously give somebody a gift later on, but to pay somebody who's a non-lawyer for getting you cases, that's called capping, is completely wrong. And I wish it didn't exist, and I wish there wasn't this deprecatory name about lawyers, but I guarantee you there's a lot of lawyers out there who are not ambulance chasers.
I'm sure. Now, it's very interesting to me that very often somebody who runs for congressman or runs for Senate happen to be lawyers. What do you attribute that to?
Well, because they're making the laws. But, in California, I don't think there is a lawyer in our assembly or Senate. It's all general citizens. In Congress of the federal, of course, there's a lot of lawyers and senators. But if you wanted to go to law school, then certainly an honorable profession, theoretically anyway, is to go into politics.
Right, exactly. Now, let's talk about your 10 tips for dealing with lawyers. I think it's very important for our audience to know how to deal with a lawyer because, most people are very naive and they walk into a law office and they sit down and they know how much they're going to pay, and very often it's a lot of money per hour, depending on, of course, on the lawyer. But, you have a lot of tips, and I'd like you to kind of tell our audience about them. So let's start with number one.
All right. Well, number one is get a lawyer who knows what he or she is talking about. And you don't want it, if you have a medical malpractice case, I don't think you want a rookie trying your case the first time. You want somebody who's been through the fires and come out on the other side. Although it can happen, I'm not saying you should never have a rookie in a particular area, but you want somebody who specializes in the area. So, for example, I do entertainment, business, media, class action litigation. I don't do tax work. I don't do, real estate. Mm-hmm. Although I suppose I could if it came along. My point is this: you want to get a lawyer who knows what he or she is doing, and you're going to figure that out because of the reputation of the lawyer, and by asking other people in the community, and by researching it. You can do that on the internet as well. And here's a tip that I recommend for everybody. So there's this entity called Super Lawyer that is throughout the United States where lawyers on a peer level rate each other, and the top 5% are printed in a magazine called Super Lawyer. So pretty much wherever you live, if you want somebody in antitrust or personal injury or medical malpractice, you'll be able to see who the lawyers in the community think are the top lawyers in town.
Right. Now, okay, so give me the steps. So somebody, we'll give a perfect example. There is harassment in the workplace. And very often women or men want to prove that they've been harassed because perhaps they've been fired, and it has something to do with their sexual orientation or something of that nature. So step one, what do they do?
Well, the first thing is you go to your state bar website and see if there's any discipline on the lawyer. I don't want a lawyer who's in the process of being disbarred or has charges against him. The second thing is I want to find out, in that case, who's the best employment lawyer who does these kinds of cases. And these employment cases are almost invariably going to be contingency cases. You'll ask around, you may research on the web, and you will also look at Super Lawyer to see who they say the top employment lawyers are. Just the same way the defendant in that case will say, who's the best employment defense lawyer? And so you really need to understand the way the community works is that you're on one side or the other for the most part. If you're a personal injury attorney on the plaintiff side, you're not an insurance defense lawyer. That's what we ordinarily call them. And if you're an employment defense lawyer, you're not going to do plaintiff work, although you might. And generally speaking, the plaintiff's employment lawyer will not do defense work overall. And then you'll go in and you're going to meet that lawyer, and you're going to say, tell me about yourself. And how many cases like this have you done, and what do you think? And pretty much everybody will give you a free consultation.
Okay. Now, let's talk about criminal law for a moment, because that seems to be one of the most interesting types of lawyers who can deal with criminal cases. Very often you go into court. I remember something very interesting that when I was a young woman, I found going into the criminal court fascinating. I would sit in the back and I would listen to the cases. Now, what about that? Did you ever think that would be something that you'd want to do?
Well, here's this little secret. For 1 year, I was a criminal defense lawyer. I was a public defender for the county of Los Angeles. So I I had quite a involvement with the system. I represented juveniles at that point. It was many years ago, and I refer cases out on occasion to criminal lawyers, defense lawyers. I mean, commonly DUI, driving under the influence, is something that comes across my desk, and I have actually successfully defended one of those cases, but it's not something I would do regularly, and would feel much more comfortable having somebody who's doing this day in, day out. You see, the deal with criminal law is that 98%, 99% of all those cases are going to plea bargain on some basis. And so if you're going to do that, if that's going to happen, I mean, look, there are people who are clearly innocent. They are either going to drop the case or they'll go to trial and have a jury. The cases that go to trial are the ones where you don't know. I say that when I was a public defender, 90% of the time they were guilty, 5% of the time they were not guilty, and then you really had to work hard to get them off. And the other 5%, you didn't know. Could have been, but, the guy had an alibi, et cetera, et cetera. So the deal with the criminal law is you got to know it inside out, what, A, the law, B, the kinds of pleas that the DA or the city attorney will agree to, and third, maybe the most important thing involved, does that lawyer have the juice, the good relationship, the reputation to make the deal with the district attorney? Because if not, you've got the wrong lawyer.
Yeah.
Ordinarily.
Yeah, but there are some people out there who are poor. I mean, and very often they're the ones who go to jail because they don't.
Well, if they're poor, they have a public defender, and that's, I will say that when I was there was a great esprit de corps, and we did the best we could for our clients, but we were really overworked and didn't have the resources of the police department. And I think public defenders, as a general rule, do a really good job. But sure, you read about jurisdictions in the United States where they, I forget where it was. It was one city. They just said, we're not taking any new cases. We're overworked. I mean, they wanted to go on strike. It was so outrageous overall. So, and yeah, probably well more than 50% of the people in the United States have public defenders because they can't afford them,
Sure, that's right. Okay, so let's now also define some of the terms that are used in the law. So one of the terms that is used is defamation. So it seems pretty straightforward, but I'd like you to give a definition of what defamation means. Okay,
well, it's under the general category libel. Libel has two areas. One is called defamation, the other is called slander. Slander is when somebody says something that is untrue about another person that is hurtful. And slander per se means we find it automatically hurtful if it wasn't true. If it had to do with accusing somebody of a crime or being dishonest in business or being incompetent or suffering a loathsome disease such as venereal disease or something like that. Defamation is simply when it's in writing and put out in the newspaper or published otherwise on the internet, for example, or in a broadcast that is shown or can be repeated. That was taped, for example. If it's a live broadcast, it's probably going to be slander, but most things are taped overall. So that's what those are. And then there's defenses. I should just mention that we have the First Amendment in the United States, and if it's a matter of public concern or a public figure, then you have to show that the journalist acted below the standard of care, which basically means he or she knew it was false, the story, or the journalist acted below the standard of care for what any ordinary journalist would be expected to do.
You remember the case that was in the Times? Apparently there was a writer for the Times, and he was, I think it was for defamation that he was sent to jail. He was writing things that were plagiarized, and forgive me, I really don't remember his name, but I remember very strongly that, boy, did they step all over him when they found out that he was copying other people's things. You remember that?
Well, I think the one that comes to mind is a guy named Stephen Glass.
There you go.
Who made up stuff.
Yeah.
Made up sources and wrote about various stories, and there were about 30, 40 stories. They made a movie out of it, out of his life as well.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. He subsequently went, I believe, to Georgetown Law School, which is one of the best law schools in the United States. Did very well. Came out, wanted to I know the guy, wanted to practice in California. The state bar lower court and the state bar higher court said okay, and the Supreme Court of California said there is no way we're letting you practice law right now, and you can come back in another 5 years, but you're not adequately rehabilitated.
Oh, boy.
And that's where that one happened. And yeah, you get this. I mean, look, libel. I do a fair amount of libel, and the cases that we take on. It's just like, how dare you write that? Yeah. The ones we've won, and we like we like it when it's a good case.
Yeah, but it's part of the First Amendment. I once talked to Larry Flint, and I asked him about his practice, and he was talking to me, of course, about pornography, and I had really a lot of questions for him about kids and all the horrors that you hear about with regard to the way people are taken advantage of, young people, older people, doesn't matter. And he just kept on saying, look, we have freedom to speak whatever we want. It's called the First Amendment. Now, doesn't the First Amendment doesn't it cover things like that? I mean, if you don't scream fire in a movie theater, but some people say things that are pretty atrocious, and they can get away with it. Am I right?
Look, each fact situation has to be looked at on its own, and in general terms, I'm not going to just look. It's not easy to go suing the media. I would say this: there's the media. If you're going to sue the media, they're going to fight back, and they're going to fight back hard. And if it's a general straight defamation from somebody who's an ordinary citizen who said something bad about your business, it's a easier case because you're probably not going to have a First Amendment defense or issue. One of the big problems with defamation is that in many states they have what are called SLAPP laws. The spelled out means a strategic lawsuit against public participation. And what that means is that they make you come in early and prove up your case. And you better have the goods on the defendant, because if you lose, you're going to end up paying the legal fees of the other side. And that could be $100,000 or plus. So that's common.
I hear you. Now, tell me about the state of privacy. What about that? Do we have privacy?
We do, although it varies from state to state. And, for example, New York has virtually no right of privacy law. California has probably the biggest one of all, and it's in the first section of our Constitution that it's one of our fundamental rights. What is privacy? The privacy is the right to be left alone. And in the last 15 years, the Internet has really changed our notions of privacy. Everybody knows everything about everybody, and it seems like arguably everybody gets to know everything about everybody. But that's not true. And there are levels of privacy, the highest being medical and sexual. You don't get to know my sexual proclivities or really anything in that area just because I'm a famous person or any kind of person. And you don't get to know about my anything relating to my medical. That's very confidential and private overall. So we have something called the law of intrusion, meaning you don't get to go take pictures where you shouldn't be or write about things that you shouldn't be writing about. And likewise, we have something called the publication of private facts. You don't get to publish things in my life that anybody else would say, that's outrageous that you wrote or said that. Don't you have any decency whatsoever? So this is a constant fight that we're having in our society right now as to what can and should be private. And that leads me to one other section to talk about, which is how horrible the state of the law is with respect to defamation and privacy on the Internet. And what I'm talking about is something called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, which is a federal law. And what it does is that it immunizes Google and Facebook and Yelp from defamations and invasions of privacy as long as the company itself did not post it. So I write a letter to the New York Times and say, you just printed a defamation, you better retract that.
Right.
They're going to do it, or they're going to be subject to very serious penalties or worse penalties. That doesn't apply to the Internet service providers. And so people are now saying things that are malicious, hurtful, hateful, wrong, invasions of privacy, defamations, and the Internet service providers, they don't care.
Right.
And they're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, but the question becomes also if, people look at what's going on with Facebook as an example. People will show the most incredible things. They'll talk about the most you want to talk about privacy, the most incredible, I have to use that word again, things. They'll show you what they ate for breakfast. They'll show you, I hate to say it, when they're in the bathroom. I mean, isn't it the fault of the people? Because somehow...
Well, yes, but it's one thing for you to show me a private act. It's quite another. And if you want to do it voluntarily, that's your business. But just because who gave me the right to show you in that manner whatsoever? Mm-hmm. So this is not going to go away. This is going to be a big problem for the rest of our lives.
Any solution to this?
Yeah, we got to change the law in Congress. But the problem is that the Internet service providers are so powerful. I mean, I think I read that Google has like 300 lobbyists alone on Capitol Hill.
Amazing.
Are so powerful, and the legislature is so intimidated that they're going to be hesitant to roll back the law to any degree to give a little bit more protection to the populace. But that's not to say that it's not impossible. I'd say with our new president, who has this antipathy towards the press, he might be willing to take a hard look at this. And I think with education of the public, such as discussions right here and now, people are going to go, he's right.
Yeah, but
we've got to
Neville,
change.
he tweets all the time. Twitter is his baby.
I'm not defending his tweeting. I'm simply saying that we might be able to get the executive branch to support the notion that people need greater protections against defamations and invasions of privacy. In other words, why are we giving a free pass to Google and Facebook when horrible things are happening, and they certainly have it within their power to investigate and to make sure that somebody's life is not being ruined. And that's what I want you and everyone to understand, is that it's so hurtful when this happens. I won a big case against the American Broadcasting Company on the show Primetime Live, and it was just lives were destroyed. Relationships broke up. People were humiliated. They have long-term suffering overall when people say malicious things. And, I've often said a broken heart can hurt just as much or more as a broken bone.
You're right. I mean, I can't disagree because, needless to say, I think about all of the people. I think about the McCarthy era when you talk about that. It's almost like people are going after people for reasons that are just absolutely ridiculous or outrageous. There's an analogy there. But let's talk about the word arbitration. We're heading in that direction now. What is arbitration?
Arbitration is a private judicial system, and it's been around probably 50, 60 or more years. And initially, people wanted arbitration because they said, well, it's quicker, it's cheaper, it's, we can get it, we don't have to put our business on the street. Well, it's swallowed the world right now, or our country. Virtually every employment agreement right now says, you get into a fight with me, you're going to arbitration, and there's no negotiation. Likewise, you want to rent a car, take out a bank account card, buy a car, so many ways in which you are purchasing things or services, you are going to go to what's called arbitration. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the big problems is that they also have the companies, and the Supreme Court has said it's okay. You can have what's called a class action waiver, meaning I have a $17 complaint with a credit card company. Well, who's going to sue for $17?
Right.
Nobody. So you want to get a class action lawyer who'll do it for the thousands of people who got gypped. Well, they're saying if you sign an agreement that said you can't bring a class action, you can't bring a class action. So that's one way that arbitration is very unfair, and particularly these class action waiver agreements. In employment law, one of the things you want to have happening is you want to be in a public court because jurors, they're not stupid. They're going to figure out what's going on, and the company doesn't want to have its bad practices made public. So that's another issue. Another thing is that you get into arbitration, it could conceivably there are sometimes laws or provisions that say if you can't afford it, they'll have to pay for the arbitrator. But if not, it can cost you really a lot of money. These arbitrators can charge as much as $600-700 an hour, and that adds up pretty quickly. So generally speaking, those who work I'm active in the consumer world. Those who work in the consumer world are loath forced arbitration, and because we always feel we're going to do much better before a judge and a jury. And the final point I'll make on arbitration is the so-called repeat provider provision. If the arbitrator knows that this particular company, he has the possibility, or she does, of working for that company again, he knows if he rules or she does rules against that company, they're never going to hire him again. So there's that worry as well. And we want if we're going to have arbitrators, they got to be randomly picked, and we want to know everything about decisions they've made in the past on employment law, for example. And you don't get that kind of information that you would otherwise if you were vetting a judge anywhere.
That brings up the point, and I want to go back to the word privacy for a moment. And what do you think about search and seizure? That was a very an important thing that happened a few years ago when they started to talk about search and seizure. Would you explain to our audience a little bit about what that means and what you feel about it?
Well, it's the Supreme Court of the United States has said you can search somebody when there's cause to believe that a crime has been committed, and you can do a pat-down to protect yourself. The problem is, how far can the search and the seizure go? Can they look at this is one of the things debated now. They get to look at your iPhone or your computer. It's in the news right now that they're doing that at the border. And they have the right to do that when you come in from a foreign country, and people are pretty upset about that overall. There's been a lot of 30 years ago, search and seizure laws were, to my understanding, a lot more restrictive on the police, but that's lightened up somewhat since then. And I know certainly I want police protected when they're going to do search and seizure, but first of all, you don't get to just automatically do it unless it's what they call an exigent situation where you need to because the facts of the situation require it. But otherwise, you have to get a search warrant to go into somebody's house to do that. And, of course, that's a fundamental right, is our right to be left alone and protected. And we're always worried about the government overreaching and whatever we may be doing.
Yeah. What about cameras? What about cameras all over? Cameras in cars?
Well, I'm down with police wearing those cameras so we can see what happened. I just note parenthetically that in London is the most camera place in the world. I mean, you can see anybody anytime on the street in central London.
Wow.
And a lot of our cities are getting that way right now as well. And so if you're out in a public place, you can't say that there's a right of privacy, and the government's going to do that. But at what point does it become Big Brother?
Yeah, that's a big question. At what point? There's a lot of debate about having cameras around. People just, they don't like it. Needless to say, there are reasons that they're there, but that's why I was interested in knowing what you thought about it. Now let's go to another question that really is going to be a little provocative, and that's called revenge porn. Now, how common is revenge porn these days, and what does that really mean?
There's a lot of angry, disgruntled, bitter, malicious ex-lovers in the world, or just people who are nasty people and want to hurt other people. There are laws in a number. And so what they'll do is they'll put up pictures that were taken or videos of a loved one, former loved one, unclothed or engaged in a sexual act. And they do it sometimes, many times, just to hurt the other person. There are laws now in a number of states that say you do that, it's a criminal act, and you can go to the slammer. You could probably sue in every state for invasion of privacy for doing that. And it's prevalent. I know, we've had situations involving that, and I'm familiar with other lawyers who have had to do it as well. And the problem here is that the internet service providers are not easy to deal with on this kind of situation and may do nothing at all. And that's another thing I just want to mention that bothers me about the internet service providers, and I'm talking specifically about Facebook and Google,
right,
is that you can't even get anybody on the phone.
No.
They just say, send us an email. We don't have phone numbers for people for us to call. You can discuss the stuff. And I just think, really, we live in a third world country if that's the case.
Yeah. No, it's all about money, and it's all about power when it comes to companies like Google and Facebook, and people support them. They love them. They think they're the most amazing thing in the world. Google. Doesn't everybody love Google because they can get all the information that they want from the computer? And when it comes to Facebook, again, they see it as a way for them to have friends, to do whatever they do on the computer, and it seems to me that it is just outrageous, but it's going to continue and it's going to grow bigger. So again, I want to address this with you. If you had a chance, this is how I would like to do it. Thinking of yourself as a very important lawyer, which you are, and the knowledge that you have in fighting situations that are really not good. When it comes to these companies, just set yourself up for how you would deal with them if you could. It's like fighting McDonald's.
If I could, what I'm saying is I want to be able, I want to be able to write to them and say, you're showing revenge porn, take it down immediately, investigate. And I'll tell you that I think that they're probably now, because people are much more aware of revenge porn. But let me give you an example of how bad it can be. There's a company called The Dirty, and there was the lower court, they printed some naked pictures of a lady, an ex-boyfriend did it, and they sued The Dirty, saying you invaded the privacy of this person, and you should have to pay. The lower court said yeah, and the higher court said no. Section 230 protects. So we got to get it so that there's liability on the part of the internet service provider if after notice they don't take down something that is a violation of the law otherwise. Why do they get a free pass? The First Amendment isn't that powerful, and I always say, the right to privacy and the right to have a good reputation is just as important as the First Amendment.
Sure as hell, right. Well, I always like to give my guest the last word. So give us the last word.
Justice is a relative concept. It's hard to come by. I want all of you out there to resolve your disputes in an intelligent, methodical manner. I don't want you to act from emotion, but from reason. You do not want to fight or defend cases because of principle, ordinarily. Maybe if it's civil rights, it's one thing, but it's always about the money for the most part. And particularly in family law situations when people are getting divorced, you once loved somebody so much. Show some compassion and understanding when you're trying to make a deal at the end. Don't give all your money to the lawyer. Try and work it out overall. You're going to see each other over the years at graduations and birthdays and weddings and all the rest of that stuff. And this too shall pass. So, justice is imperfect, but thank God we have a pretty good system overall, and we're lucky to have it.
That's right. And Neville, if you were to compare our justice system with the systems all around the world, would you say that we have one of the best ones?
We do, and I'll tell you the reason why. We have the jury system, which is the counterbalance to judges who might be off-center. And virtually no other countries have the civil justice system the way that we do, and that's what we've got to protect, and that's one of the reasons why we really don't like arbitration. We want juries, the common people, to be deciding.
There you go. Well, my guest today has been Neville Johnson, one of the most revered lawyers in Hollywood, and if there is an example of a lawyer who really is one that really wants to protect the Constitution and to do the things that help people in ways that, wow, you can't even imagine, it's our lawyer, Neville Johnson. So thank you, Neville, for being on my show.
Well, it was a pleasure.
As always, Neville. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.